Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Virtual Research Showcase. I'd now like to welcome Sandra Curry, Kidney Research UK's Chief Exec. You will be hosting today's event.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to what is going to be our first virtual research showcase. It's really wonderful to see so many of you here, and I think you're coming actually from right across the UK from some of the faces I can see on the screen. As you know, we were hoping to get together in person to hold this event, and a few things compiled against us, most notably the train strike, so that meant it just wasn't feasible to try to do this. But I would like to make sure everyone who's joined us just now knows that you have an open invitation to join us when we actually reinstate the meeting in person at the Royal College of Physicians, which is planned to be on Wednesday, the 14th of September. So a little bit delayed, but we are planning to hold a real showcase if we can do that. Please do join us if you can. I'm delighted that we have three fantastic researchers joining us for this session to really help us showcase the innovation in the research that the charity is currently funding. Before I introduce myself, I want to run through some housekeeping for the event. As you can see on the screen, the event is going to be recorded. In fact, we've started now, and we want to share that with supporters who are not able to join us online today, but wanted to be here. So if I can ask you to remain on mute during the sessions, but if you are comfortable, please do keep your camera on, because it's nice as a presenter to know that people are listening and that you can actually see nods and responses to what is being said. So if you're comfortable, please keep your camera on. But if you want to, of course, do turn it off. But mute is really important so we don't have background noise or interruption, particularly for the recorded version of it. I'd also like to thank everyone who's submitted questions in advance. We've got a really tight, packed hour, but I would encourage you, if you want to add further questions, please do that in the chat bar, and we'll try to pick them up as we go on. And if not, we'll try and respond to them after the event tonight. So all of our researchers will be happy to take questions, and we'll organise responses for you either in the session or afterwards. So most of you may know me, but for those that don't, my name's Sandra Curry. I'm the Chief Executive of the charity, heading for nearly my 10-year anniversary in September with the charity. And in that time, I've overseen quite a lot of change, definitely an increase in our research spend and some increased and fantastic collaborations. And you'll hear and see some of that tonight. I'm a really keen advocate of focusing and reducing health inequality and inequity, and particularly in health and social care setting. So our aim as an organisation is really to improve the prospects for every kidney patient, and you'll hear some of the ways people are able to do that, beginning to do that with their research now. As the largest kidney research charity in the UK, our aim is that nothing is going to stop us in our urgent mission to end kidney disease, and you'll see that as a backdrop on some of the slides today. Research, of course, is at the heart of what we do, and our passion is really to continue to improve the lives of kidney patients. We will continue to fund really high quality kidney research, and you're just going to get a lovely snapshot of that tonight. But we also want to aim to strengthen and develop our role as an organisation to enable more work to happen, to focus really on leading the thought leadership, the conversations that are happening in government and other places around the country. We want to disrupt what's happening out there and make a bit more noise about it. And we definitely want to increase our collaboration. So in our efforts to bring people together, to support innovation and to challenge the status quo, that's part of what we're sharing with you tonight. I'm really excited that we're joined by three researchers who are also share all of those aims that I know. Firstly, we'll hear from Rachel Lennon, Professor Rachel Lennon. Rachel's a Professor of Nephrology and Director of the Wellcome Centre for Cell Matrix Research. She's an honorary consultant and paediatric nephrologist at the University of Manchester. She's also a director of the Stonygate and Kidney Research UK Allport Research Hub, which is a newly launched, very innovative programme designed to make the best research happen with the best people in the most efficient way for Allport syndrome. We'll then hear from Dr. Matt Graham Brown, a clinical associate professor of renal medicine and an honorary consultant nephrologist at the University of Leicester. Matt and his team have discovered that cycling at moderate intensity for just 30 minutes during dialysis could transform the heart health of people living with kidney failure. And then Roseline Agyekum is an NIHR student in renal nursing and infection prevention and control module leader at King's College London, who will then speak about how her team are researching whether a smartphone home urine test would detect protein and diagnose kidney disease early, particularly in communities that are harder to reach. So some three fantastic and very different pieces of research being described to you tonight by three of our brilliant researchers. I think we're going to be in for a real treat. So the first person I want to introduce, I've already done the spiel of all the amazing things that Rachel has attached to her name, is to introduce and speak with Professor Rachel Lennon. In partnership with the Stonygate Trust, who are one of our very long-standing supporters and funders of kidney research, we were able to head up to Manchester last week to officially launch this brand new programme which will accelerate research, transform early diagnosis and develop specific new treatments for Allport syndrome. I'm really excited about it. I know Rachel is, and I'm sure we'll be able to hear that as she describes it to us. So over to you, Rachel, to tell us about the Stonygate and Kidney Research UK Allport Research Hub.
Lovely. Thank you, Sandra. And it's a real pleasure to be here and part of the symposium this evening. So I'm just going to give a snapshot really of what we're just embarking upon. Can you see the slides okay there, Sandra? Yeah, they're good. Okay, thanks, Matt. So what we're embarking upon with the Allport Research Hub. So as Sandra said, I'm a paediatric nephrologist. I'm based in Manchester, working at the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital, and then I lead a research team based at the Wellcome Centre for Cell Matrix Research, and we're a group of 20 or so research groups in the Wellcome Centre, all with a focus on matrix, which is the scaffolding structures that our cells in our tissues and organs need to work and survive. And we, as Sandra said, we launched last week a new programme, the Stonygate Kidney Research UK Allport Research Hub. And this is an exciting 5-year programme that we're just launching into. So what we aim to do over the next 5 years is really accelerate our understanding, so transform our understanding and treatment options for Allport syndrome, combining both clinical research as well as laboratory research. And our goals really are to not only improve understanding about what happens in Allport syndrome, but also to identify some of the genetic and clinical risk factors in patients. And importantly, because we're seeing lots of new treatment options coming through to the point of being tested in the right laboratory models, we're going to help with that. So we're going to do preclinical testing of new treatments for Allport syndrome. So that's a snapshot, which I'll just talk you through over the next few minutes. That's not possible with one person or one team, and that's needed as to think hard about having the right experts involved in the research hub. And so we've come together as a team from Manchester, where I'm based, Edinburgh and London at UCL and the Royal Free. And what's really important and part of existing work that we do in Alport syndrome is our connection with patient and patient organisations. So the team, the core team that we have already are the faces you can see on the screen right now. So I'm the team leader, and I'll be working with Michael, Bernard, and Marilyn in the physical hub in Manchester, and we'll be working very closely with Neil Turner, who's a professor of nephrology in Edinburgh, and Danny Gale, professor of nephrology at UCL, and together with Angela here, Neil, Danny, Angela, and my team at the hospital will focus on the what we're calling the virtual hub, which I'll come on to explain a little bit more about. But I'm sure I don't need to introduce our kidneys to this audience, but really to tell you a little bit more about where Alport syndrome affects the kidneys. So most of us have two kidneys, born with two kidneys, and this is the structure, the nephron, which is the functional unit, if you like, of the kidneys, and it's this structure here, the filter, the glomerulus, which is where we know the problem starts in Alport syndrome. There are tiny little blood vessels in the filter that filter the blood. And if we zoom in to this structure, we know and we can see that it has some really important and quite unique cells. You can see one just coming out to the screen to you. This is what we call a podocyte, really, really important for how the filter works. And I just want to highlight this grey line here, which is what we call a basement membrane. These are the scaffolding structures that help help our blood vessels to keep their shape and work in many different ways in the body. And in the kidney, these blood vessels work as filters. And the basement membranes, these structures, are primarily affected in Alport syndrome. And that causes problems in the kidneys. It causes problems in the ears with hearing loss, so patients need to wear hearing aids from an early age, and also problems with some of these basement membrane structures in the eyes. So what we're planning to do in the physical hub is look at understanding some of what goes on under the surface in Alport syndrome, and we've got many different ways to do that now. For the last 10 years or so, we've built up some of the tools that we need to do that. So we can study kidney cells in a dish. We can even treat particular types of cells so that they grow mini kidney structures in a dish. So they're called kidney organoids. So this is one way that we can look at understanding more about these important basement membrane structures. We have mice that have a very good representation of the problems in the kidney that happen in Alport syndrome. And so this allows us to do more detailed studies and ask some of the questions about what happens to the kidney filters in an in vivo, in an animal setting. We've also developed a fish model of Alport syndrome, and the advantage of this is that these tiny zebrafish can be used for drug screening and on quite a high scale. So it can be what we call quite high throughput screening of new compounds and new drugs. And we're in a very fortunate position in Alport syndrome, as I think we are in kidney disease generally at the moment, that there are many options that are coming through that may have potential to get into the clinic, but they need to be tested before they go into clinical trials in a robust way. And that requires expertise and the right tools. And we strongly think, we believe we have many of the right tools that will help us in the physical hub. So in the virtual hub, this is going to run in parallel, and this is where we'll be working with patient data, and this is with the RADAR cohort. So the Rare Renal Disease Registry has a cohort of around 900 patients with Alport syndrome. And what we want to do is understand more about the genetics, because on the one hand, it might seem straightforward. It affects certain collagen genes, but we don't have the full picture. And so doing more detailed genetic testing will certainly help us to understand or build our understanding of the genetics. And this will help us also to identify certain groups of patients that might benefit from the treatments coming through. So it's a beautiful synergy between the virtual hub and the physical hub. So this is what we thought was the important things to start with in terms of having a way of testing new treatments coming through, but also working with our patient cohort. But another advantage that we have in the hub is keeping some of the funding aside for new projects that come through, things that we don't know about right now. So we also have the option of funding a new project every year through the hub, and that will be, an invitation to the broader community for new ideas that may well help the mission here to accelerate new understanding and new discovery in Alport syndrome. So for that, I ask you and others and keen researchers to watch this space over the next few years for those announcements. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel, for an excellent, a really brief presentation to outline something that's huge and very exciting. I think we really appreciate you sharing that with us. So I don't think I've got any new questions, but I've got some questions that have come in prior to this evening. So we've funded at Kidney Research a number of different Alport projects over the years, as we have done with other rare diseases. Can you just talk a little bit about how the idea was developed to have this 3 prongs of the virtual, the real hub, and the future projects, and how did that all fall into place?
Yeah, so I'd say it started with a really important question, a question that was, what would make a difference? What do we need to do right now that would that we're in a position to be able to do that would make a difference for patients with Alport syndrome, and that's so the question came to us as a group of researchers, and we thought hard about that. How can we use our expertise within the UK, come together in a way that just isn't possible in standard funding schemes, and so that's where it started, and it's been a really I think a really organic process in terms of identifying what are the medium and longer term goals that we want to achieve over the 5 years. And Sandra, we've worked very closely with you in helping to really crystallize that and establish, I think, a really exciting programme.
Fantastic. It is a really big investment, and I can't say often enough how grateful we are to the Stonygate Trust who've committed to this. But we spent a lot of time sharing with them the vision of it, and that enabled them to eventually say yes and invest a very significant sum. How soon might patients expect to begin to see something that's meaningful to them and actually will be making a material difference to them?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I think what's important about the hub is that, on the 2 aspects of the hub, that we've got various things going on in parallel. So we're going to be working an awful lot more with the radar cohort of patients. So many patients, like I say, around 900 who've already consented and signed up, and we can now start to enrich that database with the people working in the hub, and that will already make a difference for clinical trials that are at the point of opening in centres in the UK. So, there are certainly in children and young people, there are, for this year, we're likely to open 3 clinical trials in Alport syndrome, which hasn't happened before, and so the work in the hub will be able to contribute to that by identifying patients that may be eligible and want to consider taking part. So that's an immediate, and then some of the more bold, ambitious projects will be embarking upon a gene therapy project for Alport syndrome, and that's not easy. It's a challenging project, and so that needs to have time to be able to develop, mature, and that will run for longer. But we've intermediate projects that will turn around in between through the course of the programme as well.
So there'll be lots of news as you go on through the next 5 years of things coming to conclusion or moving to the next phase of research by the sound of it. Is there anything that you could say about how this particular research in Alport syndrome might benefit people in other types of kidney diseases?
Absolutely. So we know that that Alport syndrome affects these tiny kidney filters, as do many other diseases that affect the kidney, including diabetes. So with diabetic kidney disease, these tiny filters are affected. And so what we can learn in a fairly clean system, where in Alport syndrome and the models that we have and patients who have Alport syndrome, it's a fairly steady progression of the condition, and the more we understand about that, the more we can relate that to other conditions that affect these tiny filters, the glomeruli in the kidneys. So I think we certainly do learn from different diseases that affect the kidney, and I don't think what we learn from Alport syndrome will be any exception.
Fantastic. So it's good news all round for patients in the wider group. So one final question before we move on to the next presenter: how can any Alport patients who are either listening to this or the recorded version get involved in the research going forward, particularly in regard to their data or being part of RADAR? Is there anything they can do to proactively do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So signing up for RADAR, if people aren't already, that's certainly one way that will help the kind of the efforts and the mission of the hub. And then actually we have many good links with patient organisations and do have a regular series of workshops and patient information days. Will be the information is no good if it stays in the hub. We want to get it out there, and we want to be able to use symposia like this evening to be able to talk about what we're doing. And so, I think it's connecting into existing organisations and updates from Kidney Research UK. Well, we'll certainly want to be, making information accessible and updates available. Yeah,
fantastic. Thank you. Rachel, thank you so much. I know you have to leave us because you've got a very important family event to get to. We really appreciate you squeezing in the time to come and share with us. We've got some great comments in the chat bar already from people, and we'll pick up and try to answer any of those questions. But I'm sure a huge thanks, Rachel, for the time you've given us tonight and for the fantastic presentation, but most importantly for leading this new approach to researching Alport syndrome. It's just very exciting and a really powerful way of moving research forward and accelerating our approach to finding new diagnoses and treatments. That's fantastic to hear. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So I'm now going to move on to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Matt Graham-Brown. I told you a little bit more about earlier on what he was going to do, and I'm going to leave him to go into the detail of that. But not much more for me to say other than Matt's studies have shown that exercise can make significant improvements on heart health and dramatically reduce the risks associated with heart disease and kidney disease. I'm going to leave Matt to tell you the detail of the two projects that he's worked on with funding from Kidney Research UK. And in fact, the projects have also been supported as part of our regular Stonygate research rounds, that research awards that have been going now for 7, almost 8 years. What we've heard from Rachel is a new way forward with a very bespoke piece of funding, but Matt's been the beneficiary for the work you're about to hear from our partnership, where we co-fund alongside Stonygate some really exciting projects. You're about to be treated to hear what two of those projects have been doing. So over to you, Matt.
What a build-up, Sandra. Thank you. I'll just apologise before I start. There's some children over at the park making an awful noise, and they keep banging on the door. So I hope they don't in the next 9 or 12 or 15 minutes or whatever it is. Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. My name's Matt Graham-Brown. I'm a clinical researcher in Leicester, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about, as Sandra said, the research we've been doing over the last 10, maybe more years, And it's not just my research. This is a team of people that I've become more of a leader in. The research program focuses on heart disease in patients with kidney disease, and that's principally because the single biggest killer of patients with kidney disease is heart disease. But it's heart disease that's of a different type. It's not the same type of heart disease that causes problems for the general population, and it's related very closely to associated problems that happen in the body, particularly with the way that muscles function and the structural changes that occur in muscles, as well as the problems that happen as kidney disease advances. And you get this sort of nasty, vicious circle where as the kidney function gets worse, it makes the heart disease worse and it makes the muscle function worse. And then you become more and more inactive, which in turn makes the heart disease worse and makes the kidney function worse. And there's that very well-used phrase, use it or lose it. Once you started to lose something and you're facing something like chronic kidney disease and the problems that can cause for you, it becomes very difficult to stop that sort of de-escalating spiral of physical inactivity and all of the problems that come with that. So our research program, although yes, it does focus a lot on heart disease, it also focuses on muscle health and muscle biology. It focuses on kidney health and kidney biology, and it also focuses on things that we think really matter to patients. So their physical functioning, their quality of life, their mental health. And whilst lots of our research is framed around trying to make heart disease and heart outcomes better for patients, we know it's very important to capture all of those things along the way, because if we don't do things in a way that are going to make people feel better as well, especially when you're talking about something like activity and exercise, it's going to be very difficult to get them to do it, regardless of how much better it'll make their heart look. So all of our research studies, they will use many of, if not all of, the tools we have available in Leicester and the locality to what we say phenotype the patient as well as we can, whether that's with really detailed MRI scans of their hearts and their muscles and their blood vessels, looking at the way the heart beats, the stiffness of the heart, the amount of scarring in the heart, the amount of fat in their muscles, those sorts of things. Whether it's with really special blood tests, looking at the protein profile of the blood and the inflammatory conditions in the blood, or the circulating RNA that sends messages between the muscles and the heart and the brain. Whether it's with understanding their physical fitness with special exercise testing machines, whether it's asking about their quality of life, their mental health, their psychological state, or whether it's about clinical parameters and things that are a bit more day-to-day, such as changes in weight, changes in body composition. But we try and incorporate as much of these types of things into our research studies so that we have a really well-described group of patients. And then regardless of the outcome of our study, whether it's successful or not, we're able to then gain a lot of extra information from all the data that we've gathered. So I'm going to talk to you principally about this study, Cycle HD, which Sandra mentioned, which was funded by a variety of people, the NIHR and Kidney Research UK. And it was a randomized trial where patients on dialysis were recruited to our study, and half of them completed a 6-month program of cycling during dialysis every time they came to the dialysis centre, and the other half were our control subjects and carried on with usual best care. And at the start of the study, all the patients had detailed MRI scans of their heart, as I've described, blood tests, lots of tests of their functional status, lots of questionnaires to find out about their quality of life and their sleep and all these sorts of things. And then we did all the same tests again at the end of the study to see principally what was the effect on patients' hearts, because we know it's heart disease that is the biggest killer. And the study recruited really, really well, and we delivered the intervention as we would have hoped, and we got 130 patients from across Leicestershire through the programme, and we were absolutely delighted that using these detailed MRI scans, we could show there was an improvement in the heart size that was beneficial for our patients, which we think means it will improve their outcomes, but also that there was an improvement in the levels of scarring in the heart. And it's scarring in the heart that is one of the biggest causes of death for these people. That was really, really good to know. And it's the best evidence we have in the world that cycling during dialysis is beneficial for people's heart health particularly, and is likely to improve their physical fitness and their outcomes going forward. But because of all of the extra data that we collected, the data about how much exercise they were doing and what the step ways they increased their exercise levels, because of the data we collected on the symptoms they were experiencing and the blood tests that we collected, we're going to be able to go back and look at a lot more from this really well described data set. So we'll be able to know the dose of exercise that you need to do for different types of dialysis patients, whether they are older or younger, whether from different ethnic backgrounds, from males and females. We're going to be able to describe the effects on different types of symptom clusters, whether those are related to tiredness or sleep problems or symptoms related to pain. We're going to look forward and see what the actual impact on survival is. And because we've got these people really well described, we can follow them up for as long as we need to do that. And because we've got all this extra blood stored, we can do these detailed blood tests to look at the changes in the profile of the proteins and the messenger microRNAs that are going around the body to know what the relationship is between changes in the muscles and the heart that are driving the good things that we're seeing. And that will give us targets to develop further treatments and to refine the intervention. And our big challenge is to get this implemented, because we know it works and we know it can make a big difference. But like most things, implementing it is the difficult part. And just one slide at the end on a study that we're running at the moment, which is funded by Kidney Research UK through the Stonygate Trust funding, as Sandra mentioned, which is the EXERT study, which is a similar type of study in kidney transplant patients. Because kidney transplant patients don't need to come to the hospital, we took lots of the information they told us about the way we were delivering our studies with exercise at the hospital. And we've defined a program here where patients are going to do all their exercise at home with careful instruction from our clinical trials facilitators. And then we're going to look in the same way at the changes in the heart and the blood and the quality of life and the physical function and the physical fitness and all the things that we know matter to patients. And I'm really pleased to say that study is nearly completed recruitment, and we should have I've seen a question, could this be done on Beam? Good question, Faiz. We can get to that. I'm really pleased to say we'll have the data for this ready to present next year. So that's my bit done. I don't do this on my own, of course, and the people who I do this with in Leicester, they know who they are. But I'd like to highlight Professor Smith and Professor Burton, who've been big leaders in this area.
Fantastic, Matt. A really interesting project and very novel when you first set out on it. I know we've got some questions coming into the chat bar, and you've spotted some yourself. I've got a question about two different groups of people and how were you able to persuade them that this was a good thing? So first of all, dialysis in prior time was a kind of inert thing. You know, people plugged into the machine and were doing dialysis. Did it take a lot of persuading for colleagues to think that it might be a good idea to actually hook people up to a cycle machine? In tandem with that, lots of people on dialysis will say that actually they don't feel particularly great during the dialysis process itself. So how hard was it to persuade patients that they might want to cycle during dialysis sessions? So both of those groups of people.
Yeah, those are two very good questions, and the answer to them principally lies in the desire for this came from patients. So if we start with the patient one first, that's the easier bit, and then you use the patient bit to tell your colleagues what you need to do. We did a lot of patient public involvement work with our dialysis patients beforehand to make sure the things that we wanted them to do in the study were acceptable to them. That includes yes, the outcome measures we were going to do, but also would they want to take part in the study? And we piloted it all before. So we'd run a study in the years before Cycle HD where we got patients on dialysis to do this, and also work out how to do it ourselves, because this isn't something that people had a real experience in or knew how to do. There's a few centres around the country that do this, but not many. So once we'd piloted it and showed that we could recruit people successfully, and we'd got patients assent through our PPI meetings that this was the way they wanted to do it. And interestingly, Sandra, when you tell people or sort of talk to people about exercise being good for them, everybody agrees, but it's time. And if you were to say, what we said to our dialysis patients was, would you like to do it, you know, on your Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday when you're off and enjoying time with your family, or would you like to do it when you're at the dialysis unit with otherwise dead time? It's a complete no-brainer, because they are attached to a machine for 4 hours, and it makes use of that otherwise dead time. And for some people, it was absolutely transformative in their health. And once you've got all that written down on a piece of paper, it's very easy to go to your colleague and say, you've got to do it because this is what our patients want and it's what they need.
Fantastic example of, you know, speak to the right people first and then things can happen. So that's really exciting. We've got a question, and it was a question I was going to ask anyway, but I can see it's come up from Sally. So we've got some evidence now. We can see that this is a good and valuable thing for people to do. There's enthusiasm for it. How do we make it happen across the country and compel others to have this on offer?
Yeah, this is the challenge for all these sorts of things. And if someone said if exercise were a pill and it was commercializable in that way, it would be very easy, but it isn't. And you're talking about a lifestyle type thing as well. So there's that to consider too. But principally, we do have the data that it's good for people's hearts. We do think it makes a big difference to their health outcomes. And we also have done an analysis to show it's cost effective. So that information's all there. The challenge now is to work with our commissioning partners, our integrated care system partners, to understand how we get it into clinical practice. And that really is the challenge, because that's all devolved regionally. But we are working to do that in the locality and across the Midlands. And once we've established what we need to do, it should then be easier to roll out once we've got the model in place and people can adopt it.
Okay, and I think I've got time to pick up one more question from Fez, which is in the chat bar, which is asking your thoughts, Matt, on how this could be applied to people who are doing home HD and nocturnal HD.
Well, Fez, I'm sure knows, and I know he does know, we have studies looking at extended hours dialysis overnight as well. The good thing about extended hours dialysis overnight is that patients have a lot more free time and have a lot more flexible time to do things in their daytime. And I don't want people to go away thinking cycling on dialysis is the answer for everybody, because it isn't. What it is sometimes is it's the springboard or the gateway to other types of activities. And if dialysis patients are amongst the most sedentary of all patient groups, because they have to sit down, and it's very tiring, and we know all of that. But once you've made that first step and you've made that little bit of improvement, then we did find patients have more energy and were able to do more activities on their days off. And that was certainly applicable to home dialysis patients as well.
Fantastic. And there's lots of other questions, which I think, Matt, it would be really helpful if we fire them to you at a later stage and you're able perhaps to answer some of them, because there are too many here for me to summarise even and bring to you. But there's people saying back in 2014 they were cycling on dialysis. So that's very early. I guess that may have been in Leicester, but very early starting on the trip of cycling.
No, so there were programs in the 90s of people trying. Wow. But once you once the person who's really passionate about it in the unit goes away, it all fizzles out, because we haven't developed the understanding of how to build it into what we provide as standard of care. And that's the challenge. That's where we are now.
It's fantastic. And I guess it's that comprehensive evidence, which is why kidney research have been getting behind it, is to provide the evidence showing the outcomes and the way forward. So really fantastic. So thanks everyone for the questions. We will try to ensure we are able to get them to Matt to give you an answer to them. And Matt, thank you so much. The work is really exciting. It's great to see it coming closer to it being available in a more comprehensive way across the UK, and perhaps being expanded into other stages of kidney disease. And again, we've got some questions about that. Why wait till we reach dialysis? Is there a way to do, really increase the uptake and activity? And
this is brilliant. I'm not going to have to do
exercise.
any more PPI. It's all going to come to questions.
Well, you know where all these people are. We can always make that introduction. And I think it's also really interesting I didn't see the BEAM question come in, who that's from, but I think we should, of course, be looking to see whether BEAM, the online platform, is able to support and encourage that general increase in activity for exercise activity.
Yeah, may I just say one more thing, Sandra? I know you're going to shut up now, but one more thing, if I may. And we in Leicester are doing this. There are other really expert leaders in, King's have got a fantastic rehab program as well. But we are all trying to work together on this. And BEAM is going to be one of the vehicles that certainly drives this forward. And certainly there's the Kidney BEAM trial, which Kidney Research UK have sponsored as well, which is available across the UK if people wanted to look into that.
Fantastic. So once again, thanks everyone for your questions. Thank you, Matt, for giving us time and joining us this evening to talk about the work that you've been doing. Really important for patients right across this spectrum, and it's been great to hear about the progress that you and colleagues have been making with that. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for the fabulous questions. You've definitely inspired some thinking amongst the audience tonight. So our final speaker I'm delighted to introduce to you is Roseline Agyekum. Again, this is another piece of funding that has benefited from the support of the Stonygate Trust. Roseline and the team at King's College Hospital are researching whether a smartphone home urine test could detect protein and diagnose kidney disease earlier in communities that are harder to reach. I'm really interested to hear the progress and what's been happening in this project. And this is looking at a cost-effective way to detect kidney disease, intervening early and giving high-risk groups the opportunity to be more aware of kidney health. That's got to be good, hasn't it, I think? So over to you, Roseline, to tell us a little bit more about that.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for inviting me. And yes, one thing that we are passionate about in King's is looking at health inequalities, particularly in the underserved communities or Afro-Caribbean and then other ethnic minorities. So that is what this project aims to look at. And if we look at, I still remember my first time in the UK, and I had to ask, what is the reason, or why is it that we have a lot of Black and ethnic minority people receiving hemodialysis? I did not understand it at that point. However, years passed now, and just 2019, when Kidney Research UK published the health inequalities in kidney disease, Kate and I sat there and we thought, obviously we can do something about it. So that is where this passion started from. So then we looked at, what do we already know about this? Yes, we know that we have more Black and ethnic minority people receiving hemodialysis. However, most importantly, we also know that there is a lot more people who are undiagnosed living with chronic kidney disease. And we thought of what is the best way in which we can actually reach this group? Because if we look at the population of patients actually receiving hemodialysis, we can then assume that there are more people living with chronic kidney disease who are undiagnosed. And that is what the focus of this project is. So in actually trying to address this project, what we want to look at is novel ways of actually identifying people living with chronic kidney disease so that we can identify the disease earlier and then intervene. But the big question is, how do we do that? How do we reach this community? How do we ensure that we engage with them and they engage with us? So in July 2019, we started our first initial public engagement. And this was attended by a group of people from Africa Advocacy, and they are also partners in this project. And what we did was to present some of the literature that we have in our hospital regarding chronic kidney disease for patients. We wanted them to have a look at the literature and actually inform us whether the literature speaks to them, with them, or informs them in any way about the risk factors of chronic kidney disease. And We were surprised. And I still remember this very comment. This information booklet was written by professionals for professionals. So because of COVID, there was a delay. So back in May 2019, we then decided to organize a first patient engagement. And we wanted patients to use their own story to actually raise awareness within our community. And that was also recommended during the public engagement with Africa Advocacy in 2019. Using the patient story, we then designed some awareness materials, but we still needed our community to actually tell us whether the materials we have designed were appropriate, whether it still addressed the issue. Because as healthcare professionals, we might identify a problem and might think that we have the solution, but the community might also have a different way of addressing it. And if we have any awareness material or we have materials that do not address the needs of the people who need that most, then whatever intervention we put in place is actually going to fail. So we arrange another public engagement and having them look at the materials that we have designed, yet there were another recommendations for us to go back home and then go and do our homework very well. So we took the feedback they have given us, and it was in terms of branding, the images, the gender, and also the cultural appropriateness of the test that we had. So we took that information back, redesigned our materials with Eagle London, and Eagle London is a Black owned media company who specializes in working with healthcare organizations and other organizations to raise awareness of health issues within the Black community. So following on from that, then we redesigned the materials, and that is where we currently are. So prior to that, part of our surface public engagement, we undertook a WhatsApp survey, and we wanted people to tell us where they would like to have their kidney function test done. And from the WhatsApp survey, we were really pleased that 93% of the people who partook in the WhatsApp survey wanted to have their kidney function checked. However, 73% preferred that the person checking their kidney function is of the same cultural background. Now that presents a challenge in itself. And then also 75% preferred that this test is done within their own community center, not within the hospital or not even within the GP system, but within their own community center. So then that brings us to what then can we do? And I like some of the stories that our patient actually shared during the patient engagement. And some of the patient stories were noticing protein in their urine and actually not even knowing what it was. And I like this one by one of my younger patients who said the kidneys are the first to shut down and the last to come back because of an autoimmune disorder. So then what was really essential was actually building trust within the Black and ethnic minority community and actually networking and continuously communicating with the group. How did we do that? That is by identifying key people or what we call champions within the community. Now, one of the model we are using is the peer educator model. And what we've done is to recruit individuals within their own communities. And we used a WhatsApp survey as part of the recruitment. Because during the public engagement, one of the key recommendations by the team was that we use social media in actually raising awareness and also in recruiting people. So we used WhatsApp to recruit the peer educators. But another key thing that was raised was that the content of our materials has to be culturally appropriate as well as age appropriate. But emphasis was on empowering our community, allowing the community members to actually lead on change, to bring about the change and to raise awareness within their own community. One of the key issues that was also addressed as to why sometimes we have minimal engagement from the Black and ethnic minority was about immigration status. So questions were asked about whether there are options for anonymized participation such that other people were not deprived from this opportunity should we start the community engagement. So we can see that our main emphasis was about learning with and from our community, and also keeping them actively informed and helping them to maintain their kidney fitness. So these are some of the posters that we designed with Eagle London, and you can see our kidney champion advert, which has been launched, and the training will be next month. However, there are also other things that we are interested in, and we've sent adverts out actually asking people to help us to understand why Black people or Black and ethnic minority people are at increased risk of developing kidney disease. So what is our study looking at? And actually, like I said, it is organizing community events, and we have targeted 10 community events. And what we want to do is to use smartphone technology, which is the Healthy IO, or currently called Meaningful Kidney. Now, the beauty of the Meaningful Kidney is that it will provide their urine, they will provide their urine, and then it gives us their result right on the spot within the community center. So they do not have to wait for us to transport the sample to the lab and wait for a number of days or hours before they get their result. However, we also want to find out from participants how they got to know about the event. This is to help us improve upon how we can engage with the Black and ethnic minority. And then we want to keep a record of everybody who attends the event, as well as what their kidney function is. And then we want to evaluate what was good about the event, what was not good, what do we need to improve, and it is important that we hear from them. And then finally, what we want to do is to actually phone or follow up on some of the participants who had abnormal results during the event. We want to find out what they have done, whether they have followed up with any appointment with their GP to find out how they are going to maintain their kidney function at that time. So that is what the project will look at. So in summary, we can see that over the past 2 years, for me especially, one of the key things that I have learned is that building and fostering trust within the Black and ethnic minority is actually key to engaging in health outcomes. And we also know that they are at increased risk of chronic kidney disease. And there are treatments available or strategies available. The key question is, how do we initiate these innovations that are available? How do we sustain it? And how do we work together with the ethnic minority such that we reduce kidney health inequalities? And key thing is about co-designing with people already within the communities. And one of the things I like about this approach is that it aligns with the NHS long-term plan, because we are bringing the NHS into the community and we are empowering people as peer educators to actually lead on health within their own communities. And our future plan will say, watch out for the space, but we think if this model is successful, we want to scale up, scale out, and then scale deep. Thank you very much.
What an excellent presentation, telling us a real story about where you started. I like the fact you started with what the problem was, and that you and Kate Bramham, who many of our listeners will have heard Kate talk about her work in the past. You started, like Matt did, with and in fact Rachel, what's the problem we're trying to address here? And I also love the emphasis on empowering the community that you described, and learning from. And in fact, we've got one question which I can just see. Apologies, because there's a lot coming in. I can see one from Sally saying, it's obviously a really well conceived and executed project targeting one specific group. And can that process and approach be kind of reallocated across other groups too? Do you think it's something that researchers could be encouraged to look at the transferability of your approach to adapt it if necessary to other groups? Does the methodology feel like you've kind of proved concept of how this works? Don't know if
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I do strongly believe that this model can be applied in any healthcare setting or any long-term condition, because the key thing is about learning from that community, but then also identifying what is currency for that community and then listening to them. I believe if we had not had the first initial engagement, we wouldn't have even known that our patient materials were actually not addressing the issue. So it is about, first of all, finding what our community needs are and networking with them. And then patience and building trust. I think these are key, but yes, it is transferable into any clinical health setting, particularly for those with long-term conditions.
And I think also in your presentation, you talked about several collaborations to specific organisations that probably, certainly we haven't worked with before at Kidney Research, and you'd I think I know that you had been working with Africa Advocacy prior and brought them into the project, but then you also added the communications team of Eagle London, and I think that's it sounds like it was a really important base for making some of that change happen more quickly in a bit more innovative way, rather than spending more time continuing perhaps as you were without that benefit of extra input. Do you want to talk a little bit about the collaboration aspect of it?
Yeah, so our first collaborator was Africa Advocacy. And one of the key things we wanted to find out from them was to actually learn, because most of their work has actually been about HIV within the UK. So we wanted to find out what was it that had worked. And yes, they also mentioned the peer educator model. But one of the key things they mentioned was actually finding out good media companies that the community identifies and aligns with. So then we started looking, which are the media companies? So we found a few, and then we presented it to Africa Advocacy, to their team again, to say, now, could you please tell us which of these media company do you think that best sells? And what we did was to actually meet with them and then listen to their aims and their objectives, and then how that aligns with our project. And then we ended up with Eagle London. And I think as a researcher, somebody new in research, I have learned a lot about my own community actually working with a media company, because it's made me understand how we communicate with a Black and ethnic minority, how we can engage them in health research, how we can engage them even in undertaking just routine health assessment checks. So these collaborations are important, and I can understand that it may take time, but we have to be patient enough to actually learn with them and then learn through them.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And just one final piece about really identifying the communities that you want to work with. I think, do you think that there's something other groups could learn from this research approach to identify other risk groups that this model could be adapted to?
Yes. During the patient engagement, one of the questions that we asked the patient was, where do they think we can identify people and then actually encourage them to engage with us, or what is the best way they think we can identify kidney disease at an earlier stage? And most of them mentioned, come to the community centers, come to the churches, come to the mosque, come to the barbering shops, come to the salons, come to the market. Roseline, what about the bus garages? What about the supermarket? So don't just wait for us to actually come to you. Come to where we are. And I think as a healthcare system, if we work that way within the community, it also creates visibility for the community to see us and actually trust in what our aims and objectives are. So whether it is for hypertension, whether it is for diabetes or even cancer, I think that this method or this strategy of networking and identifying people earlier would work and can be transferred into any condition.
Fantastic. We're running out of time. We could, I'm sure, as with all of the other speakers, we could continue, and there's a whole host of questions popping up in the chat bar here. There's some people are mentioning your quotes, Roseline, and it's a really good thing perhaps for me to sum up the whole evening with. I jotted down one of the things you said, and I was going to use it, and I can see Matt's put it in the chat bar too. It's a great quote. We have to be patient to learn with people and learn from people. And I think that application of that approach across all of our research is something that we need to make sure we keep a focus on, and we've heard it in all of the presentations tonight, but you very clearly defined it in your kind of quotes that you've given us to take away. And I think there's another quote that Rosie's commented on in the chat bar: don't expect us to come to you, but we should come to where you are. And I think, again, that's something, our patient engagement is so important from at every stage of research, something the charity's been trying to advance in recent years. And I think what you've just described is great evidence that that's beginning to happen at a more comprehensive level, of really reaching out, really engaging from the outset in the development and creation of any research that we're doing. And making sure all of those voices are heard and learned from for every stage of our research. Fantastic. It's a lovely thing to finish on, perhaps, because it just shows that together we're going to be able to make things happen quicker. And it leaves me just a minute to say a huge thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight. Remind you all that you're invited to the in-person session on the 14th of September if you can make it, and indeed to any other future sessions that the charity hosts, either in person or online. You're all very welcome to join us. The variety of projects that we've heard tonight, I think, show just a snapshot of the diversity and variety of research that the charity funds. We couldn't do that without our fabulous supporters who enable us through their funding or through their time or advice in our steering groups, our patient advisory groups, our research groups, and the people who volunteer their time to assess our research. The charity wouldn't be able to deliver these fantastic bits of research, and the researchers wouldn't have our money to do that if we weren't funded and supported by thousands of people across the UK. And neither would they be able to do it if we didn't have all of our people who give time to assess the research, to advise the researchers on how they might approach their delivery of it. So it really is a huge combined effort that sits behind the fantastic 3 projects that we've heard Matt, Rachel, and Roseline described to us tonight. So thank you to everyone who's on the screen for the part you've played in helping us make it happen. Particular thanks to the 3 presenters, and in fact to the people you have sitting behind you in your research programme, because of course you're just representing the group of patients and the group of colleagues who make it all happen too. So fantastic collaboration. How exciting to hear it all being displayed so clearly and so succinctly from all of you. I've overrun a little bit, but it was just so important, I think, to acknowledge the power of how collaboration and people coming together can really help us innovate and accelerate research. Thanks very much. Lovely to see you all, hopefully sometime soon in person, but actually online's okay too, because we can reach people that might not be able to get to us for geography or other reasons. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye. Bye.